Greetings and welcome to Distilled. In the previous video, we talked about a few basic operations in Python as well as displaying output on this shell when we write a Python script. Then we also wrote a very simple Python program to calculate the molecular weight of a hydrocarbon. When we know the number of carbon atoms and number of hydrogen atoms in that particular hydrocarbon. So in today's video, we'll actually be learning how to take a user input. So, for instance, if we take the program that we wrote in the previous video, so here we ourselves told the program that okay, the number of carbon atoms are 6 and the number of hydrogen atoms are 6. But let's say we don't want to do that. We want the user to do that. We want that whoever runs this program should tell that, okay, I have these many carbon atoms in my compound and these many hydrogen atoms. And based on that, we should be able to give the molecular weight of that particular compound. So if we do that, so that is going to be uh, a better program and a more user-friendly program, right? So to do that, we have to use an input statement. So in order to do that, first of all, let's try to understand the syntax for the input statement. So to get input from the user, we first have to define a variable in which we are going to take an input. So for example, if I want to take my input in the variable A, then this variable A would store the input, whatever the user is going to give. Now, before we are taking inputs from the user, we must be very clear of what data type do we want an input for. So for example, if I want an input of a decimal number, if I want the user to input a decimal number, then in that case, there's a different thing that I'm supposed to use, a different statement that I'm supposed to give. And if I want it to be an integer, then I'll give a different statement. If I want it to be a string, then I'll give a different statement. String, by the way, is just a set of characters. It's not a number, it's a character. Okay. All right. So now if we, let's say if we talk about this variable A storing an input. So definitely the statement that's going to be there, it is going to be input and something, right? That is going to be there. But whatever input we need to take, we need to be clear about it. So for example, I want an integer input in this particular variable A. So I would write int, and then I'll enclose the input statement within this int. So that means that this A would be an integer. So whatever input I'm going to store, that is going to be in this in an integer format, and this would be stored in the variable A. And inside this input statement, you always give a prompt. So prompt is basically a statement that would be displayed on the shell. And after that statement, the user is supposed to give the input. So for example, if I mention enter input over here, and remember input is the prompt is always supposed to be within double quotes or single quotes. It's supposed to be in quotes. So if I if I write this down, then and I run this program, so on my shell, I'll get a prompt like this. All right. So now let's say I give an input of this sort. So this would give me an error because I have given input as 2.0, which is actually a float, while I wanted an integer input as I specified over here. So this would definitely give me an error. But let's say I give an input of 5. So it would store the value of 5 in my variable A. And when I'll print A or when I'll write down A somewhere, so it will give the value 5. If I write A plus 2, so it will give me 7, right? So this is how we can take input from the user. So if I want, let's say, to take a decimal number as an input, so I'll mention it in this manner. So the input that is going to be there in the value that is going to be stored in the variable b is going to be a float variable. All right. So if I run this program, so first of all, I have to input an integer. So let's say 6 and a float. So let's say 6.0. So in this case, if let's say we try to enter an integer in the float input as well, it will take it, but it would store it as 6.0. So as you see in the float, I gave an integer as the input, but it converts the integer into a float. However, this does not work the other way around. If I input a float in an integer, it would not convert it to an integer. So that's why if I entered a float value on the first line, it showed me an error. But if I entered an integer value on the second line, it didn't show me an error because Python converts the integer into a float, but it does not convert a float into an integer. So that has to be kept in mind. All right. So this is how we can take inputs. And now let's modify our code that we wrote for calculating the molecular weight in order to get uh, a better picture of what in order to make a better code and a more user friendly code. So in this particular code, what we can do is instead of giving the number of carbon atoms and number of hydrogen atoms from our end, we can prompt the user to give these atoms, the number of carbon atoms and number of hydrogen atoms as inputs. So instead of taking this instead of feeding these values here, we'd rather ask for inputs. So that's what we are going to do. So here we'll be taking input for the number of carbon and hydrogen atoms. Okay. So now we definitely know that the number of carbon and hydrogen atoms are going to be integers. So when I prompt the user or when I take input, I'm going to give an int input statement. But if you're not sure whether it's going to be an integer or a float, it's always better to give a float input instead of an int input over here. But in our case, we can give an int input because the number of carbon atoms are definitely going to be an integer. So we'll say that NC is equal to int input, enter number of carbon atoms, and NH is going to be int input, enter hydrogen atoms. And this gives us the input from the user, and then the molecular weight will be calculated and it will be displayed. So let's run this program. So let's say I say that I have 10 carbon atoms in my molecule and let's say 20 hydrogen atoms in the molecule. So it would give me the molecular weight as 140. All right. So yeah, this is a more user-friendly program and we can actually give any number of carbon or hydrogen atoms as the input and we would get its molecular weight. All right. There's another thing in Python which you can do. So right now when I've got this printed, so I knew that, okay, this is a molecular weight. But let's say I have too many values that are being printed and I want to know that, okay, this particular thing is molecular weight, this is number of carbons, this is something else. So if I want to know that, so how do I do that? So it would be nice if I can display some text before printing the value of the molecular weight. So let's say if I display the text, say molecular weight is or maybe equals to, and then I get the value, that would be more helpful. So let's say I run this program. So it would give me something like this, molecular weight equals to, and on the next line, it would give us 140. So remember one thing, in the print statement, whenever you give a print statement and then you give a different statement after the print statement, so the print statement automatically prints whatever is given inside it and then changes the line. So for example, I gave molecular weight here. So it printed molecular weight, the statement molecular weight, it printed it. And over here, it printed molecular weight over here. And then on the next line, it printed the value of molecular weight, 140, right? However, let's say we're not wanting to do that and we want it to be printed in the same line. So there's an attribute of the print statement that we can use. So that attribute is the end attribute. So the end attribute actually decides what should be given once the print statement ends. So for example, after printing the molecular weight, the print statement has ended. So by default, the print statement changes a line. So in Python, to change a line is \n. So if you write this thing down, that would actually change your line. Okay. But let's say I don't want the line to be changed. So if I execute this, actually, the line would get changed, which anyway happens by default. So the line got changed, right? And the character did not get printed. \n did not get printed. But let's say I don't want to change the line. So I can change this. I can remove this \n and instead keep the quotes empty. I can keep the quotes empty. So instead of changing the line, I'm just giving a space or I'm giving an empty white space or something, right? So now if I execute this program, what will happen is I will see that after the print statement was executed, the line did not get changed. It just gave a code, and then it gave me the value of molecular weight, right? That is one thing that you can. Another way of executing this thing is that you give molecular weight and the value of the molecular weight in the same print state. So how you can do that is you can basically say that, okay, I want to print the molecular weight equals to, and then I can put a comma over it. And after the comma, I can write MWT. So this would print the molecular weight equals to and the value of the molecular weight one after the other, and then change the line. So if I do that, so it prints it in this manner. Okay, so it didn't change the line. It printed molecular weight equals to, and then after that, it gave a space and printed the value of molecular weight. Right? You can give multiple such statements. So for example, if I want to mention the unit of molecular weight, so I can do that. So now it will print molecular weight, the value of molecular weight, and then its unit. If I print this, so it has given me molecular weight equals to 140 grams per mole. So you can give as many statements as you want. All right. So that is all about today's video. Hope you could understand how to take input from the user.